Welcome back to another TapRooT podcast. This week I'm joined by Marcus, and we're going to be talking about containing problems. Now, I was at a conference earlier this year, and somebody came up to the booth and they asked me, do you contain problems before an incident or after it?
Good question. What did you say?
And so this immediately got me thinking, which is we have kind of different areas we look at, and different problem-solving processes put containment in different points. So there's a 8D model that came out of Ford, and it has one of its steps is looking for containment of the issue, and that's early in the process. So it's like detecting and defining a problem, and then you're going to contain that problem.
That's right.
There's other ones that look at containment for more like nuclear industry. It looks at things like extent of cause, extent of condition. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, in this. But I think there's a good discussion about different types of problems and when you have to identify them. So I think a good starting point between you and me here is how do you know what to contain before you've done an investigation?
Well, like you were saying, one of the first steps is defining the problem. So I think as soon as you recognize there's risk, for example, you find a foreign substance in your product, like whatever quality control you have identifies there's a risk. I think that's the point where you're thinking, okay, how do we contain this? How do we limit the damage?
So if we look at incidents, when we define incidents in TapRooT, we look at what is the worst consequence of what happened, or what was the worst consequence of that hazard contacting the target. If you're thinking on safety, containment is often about securing the scene. If there's a fire, it's been put out, there's no other fires in the area going on. But there's also elements that, in this person I was chatting with, their example was like they wanted to, as quickly as possible, get out some basic details of what happened because, hey, we were doing this process and somebody got hurt in this way. And everybody in their organization needs to quickly look and see if they're doing a similar type of activity. And I think in some of those cases, they might be putting the cart in front of the horse because they don't know what they need to do about that activity.
They don't know enough yet.
Yeah, but they're saying, hey, we identified, do you have this kind of activity? And put in place some sort of safeguard, I think is their intention with that. So I think there's an element to that, but there's also quality investigations, and you kind of alluded to that as well.
Yeah, I think they are different. I think the safety is probably important to contain even before you start your investigation, right? As soon as you find out something's unsafe, hey, stop, and then we'll go ahead and start our investigation. I think with quality, it's just part of the normal process when you're looking at the quality of your product that you notice that you have risk. At that point, you start your investigation, but then to make sure things don't get worse, you put in some kind of containment process.
So containment before the investigation would be something like containing the defect, containing the damage. I think back to my time in quality, we had somebody report a product was out of feature. Okay, well, we have to check everything that was run in that batch or in that order. You might have to go back and check other batches that were shipped to a customer. This is where recalls come in. There's a famous recall out right now with, it was a High Noon. They had accidentally shipped vodka in the wrong can. So they were shipping, I think it's Celsius Energy or something. I don't know what energy drink it was, but it's some energy drink. And you would have popped that open and gotten a vodka.
Surprise.
Exactly. And, some people probably would be excited about that surprise. But
some people might use an excuse.
it's the perfect can for a cruise ship. But at the same time, that's the kind of thing where you go, okay, how many orders have we run? How long has this problem been going on? I know of an incident where people were going through and they had detected a problem on night shift, and they went back and was saying, okay, when was the last time we checked this piece of equipment that had been basically it was causing a crimping issue, and when was the last time we checked it? They went back, no, they didn't do the inspection on day shift, they didn't do the inspection the previous week, they didn't do the inspection the previous month. their quality checks had completely missed. They had like 6 different units in this setup, and they were only ever checking like the first, middle, and last out of there. They really weren't. They're supposed to be randomizing it, but because of the way things were laid out in equipment, it was just easier and more convenient to check these. And so that's what people ended up doing. And they all thought other people were checking that.
I can see how that happens.
Yeah. And so it ends up being where, oh, you've got to go back months, maybe even years. You might need to go back. And how long have we had this problem that we were unaware of? So definitely when it comes to, I think, quality, there's a level of you need to do a certain amount of containment when you detect a problem.
Of course, right.
So
and I think that's what most people understand it to be. Like when you find a problem, you contain it. But there's probably more.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is at the point where you're not even starting your root cause analysis and truly understanding what happened. It just knows you have a problem, and we need to make sure that the risk is mitigated.
Well, and you can think to the Ohio train incident where they're spilling all this chemical. There's also that side of containment where it's, we've got this spill that's occurring. You have to have a plan for containing that. And for us, what our recommendations generally as to clients is to have a tactical plan for these kind of things. So you need to have a plan for if you're doing a quality investigation. Okay, how far back do you need to go? What are your guidance for defects? If you're doing environmental, you need to have a response plan for a spill. You need to have the right equipment or the right contractors to be able to quickly get out to contain something, because you don't want an accident or incident to turn into we've contaminated the water supply for an entire town. Right. And
you got to be good at it. I mean, you got to practice it. You got to drill it, because when it does happen, you've got to be ready. Like, you don't want everybody acting like it's the first time they've ever seen this, right? That's when the mistakes happen. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to have those plans in place before something bad happens, and make sure your people are really good at cleaning things up before they have to.
And I think it's a distinction too with the second type of containment. So the before containment, which is really about containing the extent of damage and containing the problem and defining the problem and containing it as best you can. The after part of it, which is you've got to identify generic causes. So I think of the containing after an investigation. You're really looking at, does this problem exist in other places, and do we need to, you're containing a root cause. So I think oftentimes some RCA methodologies focus on just containing this specific incident and don't recognize that they need to contain these problems with the root cause that they've identified.
Do you think that gets skipped over? Like, they'll contain it in the beginning, they'll do their analysis, they get their root causes, and they don't recognize, oh, wait, we have this risk in another factory, or it's set up the same way, and then they have a reoccurrence somewhere else. Now they have a repeat incident because they didn't take that extra step to go through containment after the fact when they knew exactly what went wrong and didn't recognize that it could go wrong other places.
So I think different methodologies have this gap in different ways. If you look at something like my background from Lean, the countermeasure portion where you're trying to write corrective actions is generally dealing with a specific root cause. And sometimes it will recognize you need to standardize on this, but a lot of the times when they're doing the breakdown, they really try to eliminate you looking at other areas. They try to narrow you. And so a lot of times people miss this because they're focusing very narrow on the root cause. So for us, with our philosophy, we narrow down to root cause, but then we do generic cause to start to widen, because we recognize you've got to find where else do you have similar problems. If you've got a labeling issue, you need to look at other labels, other similar equipment, or other similar circumstances. And so that's a difficult part for people. So I think a lot of companies do miss that opportunity, and they do it either because they are too busy. They got another problem to run onto, so we don't have time to do a long investigation. So we've got to do as quick as we can and get it done, or they just don't have the expertise to know where to look. So I think that also falls in, is people just don't recognize the similarity in circumstance.
So I think that containment before root cause analysis is important, right? Like we were saying. I think what you're suggesting is there needs to be a process added to this that afterwards find the root causes that cause the issue that you had to contain, but then take it a step further. You may have to contain that same product if it's being produced at another place, because you have the risk of it doing the same thing. So should there be containment before and possibly after you know what happens?
So
should it be a D9 instead of a D8?
Well, there's definitely therefore, if you think of what you find in your investigation may mitigate. So like I think of example of wind turbine. If there was a defect in the blade and you discover that we had this wind turbine that was installed and it had this blade defect, well, you're going to have to understand and figure out what caused that defect, but you also need to take time to go say, okay, where else, what was that batch order? Where was it produced by? Who was it produced by? When was it being produced? And where else did we install it? And you might have to look at things like who was the install crew, because maybe the defect came from installation. Maybe the defect came from manufacturing. Maybe there's some environmental defect that was leading to these blades degrading faster than normal or different than anticipated. So what you uncover in your investigation can very well define how far you have to go in containment. So again, that's where I push back to, you really can't fully contain it before you've done the investigation, because you just don't know the extent. You don't know the extent of what happened. So, you know, in that earlier example of that safety person that was sending out these alerts, well, you can alert to something, but you might not have the root cause. So yeah, we're telling people, hey, do you do this similar activity? But they don't know what they need to be changing or they need to be adding as far as safeguards to actually prevent this.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the risk and the worst case consequences too. I remember, I think it was like 82 or Tylenol. They had I think it was in Chicago, they had 7 people die taking extra strength Tylenol, pain reliever. And that's all they knew. They just knew, oh, we had some people die, there's some kind of product defect. And they recalled everything. They lost like $100 million by pulling everything off the shelves everywhere, which, I mean, you can't get better than that, right? That containment's pure. So they did their investigation. They found out it was somewhere in our Chicago area, somebody got into those capsules and put cyanide in them. So it was like a sabotage situation. Nobody with Tylenol or anything, but just happened. But they went above and beyond, recalling everything, and then that led them to put corrective action in place, like that tamper-resistant bottles, right? So I think that's an example of a company doing everything right. So long-term, they're going to be okay, right? Could you imagine them deciding, you know what, this is just one area, we're not going to worry about anywhere else, and just kind of cover it up? That would be...
Well, you think a similar type issue that was recent, you know, that was the 80s. This one was like, I remember there was I want to say a TikTok trend, and it was people going around opening up ice cream and licking it. And a lot of ice creams didn't have that seal on the top of them. And so people could open it up, lick it, stick it back in there. And, you know, just tying in that you can't, if you don't have that seal spot on there, you can't stop people from doing that. You can't even tell that they did it necessarily. So that was one of those, I think you've got to put in place some levels of protective measures. Because again, I don't want to recall all the product in the what if scenario. That's you want to limit the amount of exposure you have. I think something else with this, I tie this back to the post incident. You know, the DOE pushes extent of cause, extent of condition. When we think about what kind of containment we need, they would say the extent of cause being, are there any other areas where this root cause is applicable, and the extent of condition being, you know, kind of similar to that earlier containment, is this condition affected in other ways, and the extent of that condition. So you have to put that containment around the extent of the condition itself, being that defect or that safety risk. And then you have to look at the extent of the causes as well. Is that cause existing in other places?
So how prescribed is that? Like if you do find an issue, and the worst case scenario is it could kill people, like, do you already have a plan in place on what your containment's going to be at that point? Or is it the team sits down after the investigation and decides, here's what we need to do?
I think it depends. A good process safety management system has plans in place for containment. So like if you're thinking, if I've got a barrel of chemical, I need to have a catch pan that can hold that barrel. So that's like a basic containment principle, is like if it gets punctured, it's going to be contained. So most, I won't speak in generalities. But a good process safety plan would have some containment like that built into your process for how you would contain. So it's the same thing as like why you have fire codes, why we have to have fire systems that match with the kind of scenario you're dealing with. So all those different things, allow you to have a plan. So you definitely need to do it before, especially if it's risk. Now, if it's a mistake that's outside of what your, expectation is. So again, quality defects kind of typically a lot of times can be a surprise. Not that but the product recall side, like we didn't recognize that we had this condition where you could put the wrong drink in the wrong, container, right? We just didn't recognize that. That can often come up as a surprise to people, that they didn't realize they had this risk of this mix-up. They didn't have the opportunity. They didn't know that they had the opportunity at this point. A lot of companies push things like failure mode effects analysis before, and they can do those, look for these different defect types, for those, what causes those failures. And then as a part of that, you're supposed to put in a mitigation strategy for each of those that you identify. So it's a good practice to be doing that proactively, but a lot of times you're recognizing something you didn't notice when you're doing an investigation. And so there's a point where I think at the end of an investigation, you also should be doing something to say, hey, how would we catch this in the future? How would we catch this so it doesn't happen again? Or how would we recognize that we've gotten ourselves into this condition? In quality, you often see things like people will add another inspection, or they'll add another inspection point. So, in safety, we always say the top 3 is discipline, training, and corrective actions. Well, if it's a quality investigation, the top 3 corrective actions is discipline, training, procedures, and adding another inspection. So they add another inspection point. We'll catch it then.
It sounds easy, yeah.
Yeah, we'll just inspect it more. What you find in reality is the more inspections you add on a single feature, the less reliable those inspections as a result tend to be, because people end up trusting there's a safety trust there that someone else is doing the inspection.
Yeah, you're thinking, oh, I'm the 4th person to do this.
Yeah. And
is it really necessary?
I never find a defect. Right. Do I really need to do this? And that complacency creeps in a lot with quality type.
Well, and I think where I'm thinking would be not a good place to be is when a company or an organization has to make a decision in the moment about, are we going to contain this, or is the risk not so great that we're not going to worry about it? Like, do we put profits over safety, over quality? Like, I don't think I would want people in that position. Like, it should be prescriptive. There should be a plan. Like, if it's this type of product defect, or if it's pharmaceuticals, when this batch shows this, like, here's what we do. This is what we're going to do. We don't care about the what it's going to do to the company. We care more about our long-term reputation, keeping people safe.
Well,
do you think is that how most companies run?
There definitely is some element, but I hear one of the things I used to hear in manufacturing was we build an over-engineered product, and we need to reduce some of that because we're spending too much resources, which makes us too expensive. So if you think like in wheel bearings in a vehicle, how long does that wheel bearing need to last? Traditionally, you'd say, well, it needs to last longer than the life of the car. Well, if the life of the car is 300,000 miles, that's a very high performance wheel bearing, right? Relative. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If the life of a current modern car is 100,000 before it's getting, tossed to the side, well, you have a very different quality requirement. And so that's the kind of thing of like, oh, I'm making a million mile part versus it goes 200,000 miles, and you're going to have to replace it once you get there. And so I think there's a level of, companies really have really narrowed down their quality requirements to minimize to the exact need they have. Mm-hmm. So, child car seats don't last forever. Could we build one that lasts generations? Absolutely, but there's a limit on how long they will tell you. And expiration date on a car seat seemed a bit crazy to me when I had kids, but you start seeing if I've got one that's been used for 3-4 kids, it's broken down by the third kid, and you go, what was the date? Oh, it's past its date. You can't use this anymore, and there's a reason it starts to break down. So those are the kind of things you have to look for. Is they've designed it, but how narrow do you cut that margin? Now, I think some advice for people at the end of this for things to look for containment. When you're doing investigations, if you decide this is a high enough risk, what our recommendation is in TapRooT is if it's a high enough risk, you need to be doing this generic cause analysis. Absolutely. You need to be looking for how you can contain the issue and contain the extent of that problem. So we give people the recommendation that they need to do audits, and they need to look at trending data to see if this is really a reoccurring problem. Does this root cause exist in any other areas? Are there things that are missing labels, missing a best practice, doesn't have the right procedure? Are there things that are using this bad tool? Are we using this bad tool anywhere else in this way? Those are the kind of things that we guide people on and give them this guidance on. How do you look for generic issues, and how do you think about not just fixing this specific problem, but fixing, other areas so that they don't result in accidents.
Yeah, being proactive. Taking those corrective actions you're putting at that site to fix that issue, and deciding, well, is the risk the same somewhere else? If it is, let's go ahead and standardize these corrective actions across the company.
And if you want more guidance on how to do investigations, how to look at containing issues after an incident or before an incident, the best place is going to be your 5-day TapRooT Advanced class. It's where we cover both how to do low to medium risk incidents where maybe that kind of containment is more optional because it's a lower risk. Mm-hmm. But it also covers the high risk where we require you to do generic cause. We require you to go do this audits, look for those problems, and look for how to prevent problems before they become accidents.
Well, everybody gets frustrated with reoccurring issues. I mean, It's a good way to stop. If one of our clients, people we help, if one of their red flags, well, we have too many of the same type of incidents, that's the piece that's usually missing. That's what we can help with is, well, let's go ahead and recognize this risk in other parts of the company so you don't deal with the same problem in different sites.
So if you're wanting to get 5-day course training, check out our website and our course page. You can find an upcoming 5-day course in your country, in your region, and find which one fits your schedule. And we'll see you there. Marcus or I, or one of our other integrated instructors will see you there. As always, like, comment, subscribe down below, and we'll catch you at the next TapRooT podcast.